What we'd like to do now in the second half of the program is really change the focus a bit. We certainly know that there's lots of literature, lots of research, and much more evidence in the past several years to really take a look at art and how art in almost any form influences the health of an older adult. So we'd like to really reframe some of the questions now and ask Tom to talk a little bit about how art intersects with health and the many examples that he has to relate to us. Before we start, though, we had talked to Tom a moment ago about just talking very briefly about what it's like to be the mentor for several apprentice woodcarvers and how he designs his program so that he mentors these younger woodcarvers. So we'll just spend maybe 5 minutes on that, and then let's move forward into the intersection between art and health.
Well, when I find out that I'm going to get an apprentice, usually I'll sit down and talk with them for anywhere from an hour, sometimes 2 hours, to find out what their interests are, okay, and why they want to do this. And I try to get them to open up a little bit. I knew right away when Ellyzabeth came to me that she's into horses, so I knew I was going to have to gear a lot of the projects to have something to do with a horse, okay? So that's what I did. Jessica, who was one of the first apprentices that I have, and is still working with me, it's been, God, she's been carving with me for 10 years now, I guess. Her whole thing was she wanted to learn the way the Acadians carved. That's what she said when we sat down to talk. She wanted to learn the whole history of Acadian carving, which blew me away when she started that. But her ancestry is Acadian. She was also, which I didn't know when she first come to me, she was actually one of my cousins. Let me see, how does that go? Her great-grandmother and my father were brother and sister. I never knew it. But anyway, so I had to gear a lot of her work to things that I could relate to in the history of the Acadians, okay? She did things like butter molds with Acadian designs in them, which would have either fiddleheads or something to do with the church. She did half-log bowls, which they used to make all the time to use when they were working the butter and that kind of thing. She did forks and spoons that were used in the home with a traditional design and using traditional woods that were found locally. So I tried to gear everything to her in what she was interested in. And the same thing with Ellyzabeth. She started with a very simple horse head in relief. And then she went to a running horse in relief. Mm-hmm. Then she had to do her one serving bowl, which they all have to do. And I can remember it very well because I said, okay, you're going to go pick out a piece of wood. You're making some type of a serving tray or bowl. So she come back up with this very odd-shaped piece of butternut. She says, this is it. And I looked at it and I said, okay, let's see the design. So she drew out the design, and we had very little to cut out on the bandsaw, right? Just a little bit on one end. So I still had no clue what it was going to be, but it was all right. I knew she was going to learn. So she started hollowing it out and working it. Then she went over to the drill press and she drilled a hole in it. I'm going, boy, I don't know. And she went down on the bandsaw and she cut out this thing. It looked kind of like almost like a fork, I guess. And I said, what's that going to be? She said, it's going to be a cacti. They went, okay, where's that going? She says, in that hole. I said, that's going to look kind of weird there, isn't it? And she, no, you wait. It all worked out because the serving tray was a big pepper. That's what she carved in it. And the cacti was so that when she put her fork and spoon in it, she could rest it in that part of the cactus. It was perfect. Okay? But she saw it and I didn't in that piece of wood. That happens. Okay? Doesn't mean that one piece of wood can only be one thing. It's whatever it tells you. Right? So then she decided she wanted to do a carousel horse. And I said, well, before I put out $500 for wood, we're going to do a small one. So she did one that was about like this. It turned out great. So I said, well, okay, design it. So she's designed this full-size carousel horse, and she's working on the head right now. And in between, she did some ducks and a few other small pieces. I think you did some ornaments, tree ornaments for a project that we had for the local Rotary, where we all did ornaments, put them on a tree, and they had an auction. So we did that. Try and keep her busy, you know. And I think with apprentices, you have to keep them interested. It has to move along. You know, you have to let them pick their projects, but don't let them get bogged down into something too big, too fast. So I think that's a very important thing. And I also like to carve while they're there. That way they can see how I do things. And they can see how I start and how the design comes out. And they can follow a project. And that's another thing that I think is very important with apprenticeship programs. That 80 or 90% of the kids today that go to school don't get the whole picture of something from start to finish. You know, everything comes as a kit, or comes in a box, or comes in a bag, and all they have to do is a little bit of work to finish them. My apprentices go out and we look in the woods. They go to a sawmill. You know, I want them to see every aspect of that piece of wood. You know, we go up in where Irving is planting trees, or we go to Seven Oaks Sawmill, which is not too far from our house, so that they can see how it works. So that's the way I do my whole program.
Elizabeth, do you want to comment on what it's like to be an apprentice and the meaning it's had for you to be learning from your grandfather?
Well, it's interesting. At first, I was like, I have a lot of work ahead of me, and now I have this carousel horse that I know that's a lot of work, because I have the head, and I've almost put, I don't know,
30 hours.
Yeah, 30 hours in it, and I've only roughed the face, and I saw the neck and all that, and I'm like, well, this will take up my summer. So, yeah.
What's it like learning from your grandfather?
Well, from that, I don't have to travel far. I live down the street, and that's it. And I think it's because now we're related, and now that I'm more connected to him. Like, we communicate better. We relate more now. Now that I am interested in the same things that he is. So now, I don't know. We're like the same person, but I'm the girl version of him.
Have you learned anything about your grandfather you didn't know before?
A lot of stories that I probably shouldn't have heard, but they were very interesting.
Well, that's nice. I think you're both fortunate to have each other. Well, I want to introduce Dr. Charlotte Paolini, and Dr. Paolini is the medical director for our Geriatric Education Center. And as I mentioned earlier when I made introductions, Dr. Paolini will help to facilitate the second half as we kind of change the focus a bit and talk a little bit more about health. So Tom, maybe you could just start off and, how has being a woodcarver for all of your years, has this had an influence on your health?
Oh, I think so. I think it's...
And in what ways?
Well, it's had an influence on a lot of things, and I think it's all been good. For one thing, it's had an influence on my relationship with my wife. When I'd come home from teaching maybe 150 kids during the day, and if I went to the workshop and I took a big piece of wood, took my mallet out, my big chisels, my wife knew not to come and bother me. Just leave me alone for a while, because I didn't have a very good day. If I would come home and start working on a small piece like this, she knew everything would have been fine during the day, and she could, come to the shop, talk to me, or whatever. But that kind of, it was a very important thing to me because it was stress relieving. I could come home and pound the heck out of a piece of wood, rather than take it out on students or my kids or my wife or whatever. I'd go up, and sometimes I'd be there until 2 in the morning in my shop, which isn't a good thing. I will tell you that. Because when you get tired, you get careless. I remember one night I was up there at about 2 in the morning, and I have a wood floor in my shop. Why I ever did this, I don't know, but I was working on my easel, and I had a big V-tool on the shelf, and it rolled off, and instead of just letting it hit the floor, I went to catch it, and went right through, took a nice V right out, So I went, oh, that's pretty. Took some super glue and put a little in there, and went like that. Put some tape around it and went to bed. Next morning I got up and took the tape off, and it was all right. But I didn't do that again, So you learn from your mistakes too. But what I find with carving is it's very relaxing, and you can use up an awful lot of time without even noticing it. Okay? There are drawbacks if you don't know what you're doing, like the reason I like traditional carving is because you're using hand tools. A lot of carvers today use these awful grinders, and you go in their shop and the dust is everywhere, and they're breathing that in. It's not good for you. Where you come into my shop, yeah, there's some dust, but it's not from one of those. It's just because I don't clean it often enough. I don't have time for that, So, and you have to know what type of wood you're using, because some of them can be detrimental to your health. Okay? And I think that's the important thing about getting some lessons, reading some literature, and keeping yourself healthy. Not letting your hobby make you sick. And that can happen with a lot of different hobbies. Okay? I find that wood carving is also, you don't have to be out on a pair of skis to get a lot of workout, a workout. I don't carve sitting down. None of my students, they carve standing up. Okay? Because you see the carving better, you're more focused, and I just find it's better for you. Okay? and you're using all the upper body muscles. I had a young occupational therapist tell me that I would never have carpal tunnel because of the way I carve. I don't know if she was right, but I don't have carpal tunnel, and I'm over 50. I won't say anymore. So I think what you do with your spare time is very important to the way you feel. If you retire and you have nothing to do, I don't think you're going to last very long. You don't have anything to look forward to. Okay? When you start a new carving, oh man, it's like, can't wait to get it done. And you look forward to that until that piece is finished, and then you start a new one, and you can't wait until that one's done. So you're always looking ahead, and I think that's important. The day that you have nothing to look forward to is the day they're going to put you in the ground. That's what I feel, And it's like, I used to tell my students, the day you don't learn anything had better be the day they put you in the ground. Because you have to learn at least one thing every day. It's my theory, okay? And that's the way I live. I paint. I wood sculpt. I'm big into black and white photography. Okay? I make my own wine. That way when the corks get loose, I get a chance to drink a bottle of wine for a new cork. All that has to work together. And a lot of my students are people that have retired. I had a gentleman, I told him I was coming down here. His name is Peltier, his last name, good French name. He says, well, I want you to tell them about me. I said, well, what about you? He says, well, 6 months ago I had one of those defibrillators put in here, he says. And if it wasn't for this class and these carving lessons, I'd be dead. So, I don't know, he says, I can look forward to tomorrow every day because I have something that I haven't finished yet. So it's important, I think. My mother lived to be 90. She never finished everything that she wanted to do. She was in the hospital once. That was about a year and a half before she died. Oh, wait a minute. No, I'm wrong. Twice. She had 5 kids, and I was the only one born in the hospital. So, twice she was in the hospital.
Well, Tom, you've told us that you're over 50, and I won't ask for any more details than that. But I was wondering, as you have gotten older, because you've been doing this since you were a child, actually probably younger than Elizabeth, and I noticed that you wear glasses. How do you think your carving has changed, or has it changed in terms of hand-eye coordination, depth perception, that kind of thing? When I was in my training, my surgical trainers were always very happy to hear I wasn't going to go into surgery because I didn't have good hand-eye coordination. And I'm also a lefty, and that intrigues me to hear that you're a lefty as well. So do you think that your ability or what you choose to do has changed at all as you've gotten older, or haven't you really noticed anything changing either because of visual changes or strength or anything like that?
I don't think that it's changed any. If anything, I'm probably more into detail now than I was. But I think I shake more until I'm touching the wood, and then I have very good control. But I've been that way for like 15, 20 years. I can remember when I was teaching school, and I was teaching a painting class, and one of the kids said, Mr. Cote, how do you make such straight lines? You shake like crazy. And I do, until I'm at the canvas, I shake. But the minute my finger hits the canvas and I take a liner brush, I can make straight lines like nothing. So I think a lot of it is control too. I think if I wasn't doing these things, I'd probably be shaking all over the place. But by teaching myself how to control that, doesn't seem to bother me. And my eyes, I take my glasses off when I'm working detail. So, you know, it's one of those things. The older you get, you know, you compensate.
Yeah, we do, and often we do it without even understanding or knowing that that's what we're doing.
Right.
Yeah. Would you say that in terms of your physique, you look like you're pretty fit, and now you're telling us you carve standing up, but not standing on your head, just standing up. Okay. And so you have a strong grip and strong upper body musculature. That is.
Seems to be, you know, I can't do what I did when I was 20, you know, But
you're working with some very heavy objects, it sounds like.
I do.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I move, you know. It's funny because my son, who is, 35?
Mm-hmm.
Kurt? Yeah, he's 35. I think I have a better body than he does. And you know, the other day I'm looking at him, I'm going, God, when I was 35, I looked a lot better than that. You know, and he'll go out and move 5 or 10 bags of pellets, and he's tired. I go out and move a ton, and go over and carve for 4 or 5 hours. I think it's just the way you're brought up, too. Mm-hmm. You know, I've always worked. Even when I was teaching full-time, I had a lot of stuff to do when I got home. So I didn't come home and sit in front of the TV. You know, I might build a garage, or I have antique cars, so I'd go out and work in the antique cars for 4 or 5 hours, you know. And I think that's a big thing with the younger generation. I think they're losing some of that stamina that the older people have, especially up in the valley and up in northern Maine, because we did everything, you know. I can remember when I used to have to go out and go across the street and over the snowbank and down to get water out of a spring. Mm-hmm. Bring it back and bring it in the house. And that wasn't bad, except if it was wash day. You'd have to go over, you know, 8 or 10 times. So.
Elizabeth, do you think that your health and your what your day looks like is different from other girls your age?
Yes, because as my grandfather said, most kids my age, they do their homework and then sit on the computer or watch TV until it's time for supper and then go to bed. Unlike me, I mostly go home, do my homework, and then I have sports and like DI and all that. But then I have time to come home and come carve with my grandfather. So I am hardly in front of the TV. I have an iPod that I'm on sometimes. So yeah, I'm a little different.
But in a good way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Tom and Elizabeth, when people find out that you're such accomplished wood carvers, what is their reaction?
Well, with me, they usually say, well, where did that come from? Or where did you learn how to do it? Okay? Or, you think maybe I could do that? I get a lot of that. And I always say yes. If you have the time and the patience to put into it, you can do it. But I also think that a lot of people just look at it and go, oh, it's a piece of wood. You know, they don't realize the time involved because there's a flood of things that come from Asia now that are turned out on machines. They don't realize the training and the time and the patience that you have to put into a carving. So, what do you think?
mostly what you said.
Oh, mostly what I said.
Yeah.
All right. You can tell she's a really big talker. So.
Well, Elizabeth, you've had lots of awards from what I understand.
I have. Yep. Down in Augusta for 2 years.
Yep.
2 years running. I got first place for youth category. Then this year they kicked me out. They said I was not being very nice and I had to let other kids win. So now I am in the novice group with older people. And hopefully, with my carousel horse, I'm hopefully going to finish by then. I'm going to win that.
Good.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah, usually you can stay in the youth category until you're 17. The first year she entered, which was 3 years ago,
Yeah.
she came in second place to a young man who was 17, and he carved a duck. And she said, "Can't believe I got beat by a duck." And that was her whole thing. She was going to win next year.
I beat him.
And she beat him the next year, and with a horse, right? Yep, with a horse. So then this last year she won every category that she put a piece in youth, plus the big prize, the Meservey Award. And so then one of the judges came over, and I was judging part of the show, not where her things were. He comes over, he goes, "I think you need to move your granddaughter up to the next level." I said, "Well, why? She's only 13. He said, "Because she won everything again this year. And we won't have any other youth if we don't get her out of there." I said, "Well, okay, we'll see what we can do." So that made me feel really good, I'll tell you. So.
Yeah, good. Do you recommend that if someone has ADD, attention deficit disorder, and kind of, has trouble with concentration, could they be a woodcarver?
Oh, yes, definitely.
We'll talk.
Yeah, most definitely. I've had, when I was teaching wood sculpting as a fine art in the high school in Limestone, we were the only school in the nation that had that as a fine art. So for 10 years, I taught that as a fine art course, and I used to get all of the special ed kids, whether it was ADD, you name it, I'd get it. And I would say 95% of them would turn out really nice pieces. The thing is you have to put them in an environment where they can concentrate and not be distracted. So I used to make cubicles or whatever I needed for them to work. And I wouldn't put more than 4 people to a table, preferably 2, one on each end, and leave lots of room in between. And I found it worked very well. So, and I also worked with cerebral palsy students. When I first started teaching, I taught at a place called the Helen Knight School. It was strictly for cerebral palsy students. And I had 2 young men who wanted to learn carving. I remember Jeff Morrill, who was Swedish. He wanted to carve birds, and I was not a bird carver. But I said, "Well, I'll help you all I can." And he would start carving, and I helped him. And finally, I got a hold of Wendell Gilly. I don't know if you know. He's a famous bird carver from Northwest Harbor, I believe. And there's a museum there now of his work. So I contacted him. I said, "I have a young man up here that wants to be a bird carver, and I am not. Was wondering if we could come down and visit you." And I told him the situation. He says, "No, you can't come down and visit me." He says, "I'll be up next weekend." Up he comes. And he brought all this stuff, some rough outs and some finished carvings and a book, And he got Jeff wound right up and ready to go. And, I think he turned out probably 6 or 8 birds before he passed away. He caught pneumonia and passed away at age 21, I think. Yeah, window was great help. And there's resources for people, you know, just knowing how to get to them.
Tom, could you tell us a little bit about, with Acadian lineage and tradition and culture, how does Acadian culture view growing older and caring for older parents and helping to maintain dignity and independence?
Well, I think the Acadian lineage or heritage is a lot different than a lot of areas now. If your grandmother and your grandfather are very important to you, and if you have great-grandparents, they're even more important. They still get together at least once a week, you know, the whole family. It might be at one of the kids' homes, it might be at a grandmother's home, it could be a great-grandparent's home. But they're going to come together and have a meal usually, and everybody will bring something and, you know, spend the evening. And if there's something that needs to be done around the home, let's say firewood has to be brought in or whatever, it's usually done without anybody making a big fuss over it, you know. I can remember when my parents were getting up in age, and myself and my two brothers, we'd go up and we'd pile the firewood in the garage or whatever. We'd split it. You know, it was never, Dad, you know, you going to put your firewood in? It was never that. If it was, sometimes it would be Mom would want to have one room painted or whatever, you know, and the girls would go up and they would go through the whole house in the spring, and there was never anything said about it. It's just something you knew that you did. If you get a big snowstorm, they don't go out and shovel the yard. You know, you have it said that, like, either I'm going to go up this time, or if it's your turn, or, you know, if you can't make it, call me, I'll go do it. And I think it's important because not only do your siblings take care of you, but also you help them. It's a big circle, you know. I've seen it where, like my wife, her parents were French-Canadian, but her mother wasn't very homemaking type person, okay? And so my wife would go up and visit with my mother, and she learned how to knit, she learned how to tap, she learned how to cook. And I can remember the first time my wife went up to cook spaghetti sauce. She goes, I'll never get that right. I go, why? She says, well, she put a handful of this, a pinch of that. She says, how do you measure that? So I said, okay, next time you go, bring your measuring cup and your measuring spoons. When she takes a pinch, find out how much it is. Oh, that's a good idea. So we now have the spaghetti sauce that my mother used to make. But it was because she went up and learned from her how to do it. You know, ploys, staple up there. Got to have ploys. You know, you have to learn how to do those. You know, they're only cooked on one side. I can remember the first time my wife made some, and she flipped them over, and they were brown on both sides, and she brought them to the table, and I go, what's that? She says, well, ploys. And I said, no, those are pancakes. She said, no, they're ploys. And I said, well, better go see Mom. So the next week she went and saw Mom, and she learned the difference. We were in Alaska. I come home and got married, took my wife. We went to Alaska because I was in the military. And we'd been there about, I'd been there almost a year, and she'd been there about a week. And I come home, and it was 45 below zero out, she had made this big batch of chicken stew. So I go into the kitchen and I take the top off and I go, "What did you make?" She says, "Chicken stew." I said, "Oh." She said, "But I had a problem." I said, "Well, what's the problem?" She said, "I put dumplings and they disappeared." Well, evidently, I had her call Mom anyway. But what happened was she had put too much milk or something in the dumpling. So when she put it in there, it went psh, and the soup was white and it was thick and it, you know. Anyway, she now makes very good dumplings, but the first time she tried it, it didn't work very well. So I think it's important, and the Acadians do this very well. They make sure that things go down the generations, and the younger generations make sure that the older generations have a quality of life. And I think that's important.
Tom, from a healthcare perspective, what would you know, is it important that health professionals and ask you about your passion and about your art form? Is that important, and why?
I think it is. I think it's very important because of a lot of different reasons, I think. But one is, you know, if you come in, or let's say I go see my local doctor, usually I'm in there and I'm out of there in like 10 minutes. You know, it's breathe 3 times deep. You know, yeah, it's still going. You know, it's that kind of thing. And I remember when about a year ago, I went in and she said, "You know, your blood pressure's up a little bit." I said, "Oh." She says, "Yeah, I'm going to put you on a medication." I said, "No." I'm a little stubborn sometimes. She says, "Oh yeah, we've got to put you on a medication." I said, "No." I said, "You know, I've had a really stressful morning." She said, "Well, what do you mean?" I said, "Well, I'd been working on this piece for 100 and some hours and I just broke it. So I'm pretty stressed out." She goes, "Well, what do you do?" I said, "Well, I'm a wood sculptor." She goes, "So you just broke a piece you were working on for 100? That might make your blood pressure just a little high." I said, "Yeah, probably does, you know." So she didn't give me any medication. I went back home. She said, "I want to see you in 3 weeks." I go back in 3 weeks. "Oh, your blood pressure's fine." I said, "I didn't break anything this morning." You know, I think it's important that you talk to people. And a lot of physicians today don't take the time. It's one of those things where it's not as important, maybe, to them, but it could be very important to the way that person's feeling that day, or maybe just the way they feel all the time. You know, there are weeks that go great with me. You know, everything is chips and flying and everything's working great. And then there's the weeks when, the pipe freezes in the cellar, the pellet stove quits at 4 in the morning, you know, those types of weeks, where if I don't have my hobby, I'll bet you my blood pressure would go way up. But I'll take that, take care of it, and then go and carve a while. Everything kind of levels out.
So Tom, for health professionals and health profession students, what kind of questions could they ask their patients that would get at that information so that they could have better understanding?
I think one of the things would be just to ask them, what do you do in your spare time? You know? Do you set time aside for you? And if you do, how do you use it? I think that's very important. You know, a lot of people don't set any time for themselves. I try to set at least 30 minutes where I can just do something that I want to do, not carve a piece for somebody else. You know, it's like I could sit down and carve one of these. That 30 minutes is just doing something that I want to do. Well, to me, that's better than 6 hours sleep, that 30 minutes. But a lot of people don't do that. They just, you know, it's for this one and for that one, and I've got to get this done. So you do have to set some parameters, and I think that amount of time, even if it's small, can make such a difference.
So does this mean you don't play bingo?
I don't play bingo. I would probably if there was a bingo place close. I don't know.
But it sounds like your sculpting is in addition to probably earning a living for you, and it's a trade, and you teach it, but it's also therapeutic.
Oh yeah.
It's your antihypertensive medication.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. I think it's very important, and it's funny because when I really want to relax, I paint. Take a nice big white canvas and just throw the paint on. It's even more relaxing than carving, you know, because I don't have any expectations of my painting. That's not my number one art. You know, I enjoy it, and I turn out some, I don't know, decent paintings. Okay. You know, I'm not going to be Picasso, or I could be Grandma Moses.
Grandpa Moses.
Grandpa Moses, there we go. You know, but I just enjoy it, and it's funny because I teach a class in painting on Monday nights, and I would say the average age in that one is 70. And it's funny. One of the students, I used to go sit in her classroom when I was 4. Okay, Mrs. Pierce. And, you know, it's awfully hard to critique a painting that's done by somebody you used to go sit in their classroom when you were 4. You have to be very nice, very, how could I say it?
Diplomatic.
Diplomatic, yes, definitely. That's the word. But it's so funny because she'll come in and she'll say, well, what are we painting tonight? What mood are you in? She'll say. I said, well, what do you mean? She says, well, are we going to use a lot of blue? Or are we going to use a lot of purple? Or are we going to use a lot of brown? I said, well, I think we're going to use them all tonight. She'll go, oh, wow, this is going to be a good night, she'd say. You know, and she'll sit down and get her canvas out and her painting and paints, and we'll start, and she'll say, we're going to get some green out, because she knows my favorite green is called Hooker's Green. And I remember the first night that she came to class, and I said, get out your Hooker's Green, and she went, what? What was that? I said, Hooker's Green. She goes, there's no such thing. I said, yeah, there is. So I took a tube and I showed it to her. She went, I said, that's my favorite green because it's the truest green that you can get. Oh, okay. So I always remember that. If I live to be 90, I'll remember her face when I said that. It was an interesting evening.
So Tom, this seminar will be available on our website for health professionals and health profession students to view. Any final thoughts or words of wisdom, anything that you would want health professionals or health profession students to know about how art creates a sparkle in your heart as you're growing older?
Well, I think if I was going to sum it all up, I would say that any time that you can put into an art form is going to be good time spent, not only for the art you're going to turn out, but for your own mental health and can be for the health of your body. Because if you use those muscles, they're going to stay a lot better. And if you use this thing a lot, it's going to stay a lot more sharp. You know, if you let this thing go, you can't get it back. And having a goal, always another goal, keeps you going. I know with my carving, if I didn't have some piece in the works, I don't know if I could get up in the morning and get myself motivated. That's why I always have about 6 or 8 projects in the works. You know, depending on the day. If I want to work on a piece where I'm taking big hunks of wood out, or if I want to go and work on little tiny details. But I think it's important to keep yourself active, keep your mind active, and keep yourself always on a little downhill slant. You know, you're always looking for that next project or the next thing to finish. So you're always going downhill. I just think that's important. So that's my whole theory. The other theory that I have, and I have to tell you, this is from my great-grandmother, and I think it's important, and a lot of people don't realize this. She used to say, what you eat for breakfast turns to gold. What you eat for lunch turns to silver. And what you eat for supper turns to lead. And I tend to agree with her. I eat a big breakfast, medium lunch, very little for supper. And my mother was the same way. So I think that's another thing that you should keep in mind, how you feed this body.
Yeah, no.
Anybody else have any other questions? No? Quiet group, right. Well, Tom
Thank you.
and Elizabeth and Kathleen, thank you so very much for coming. This has
You're
been a
very
wonderful,
welcome.
wonderful sharing.